Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk through a powerful and controversial moment, the protest under the slogan, "I will not be silenced," in reaction to the ban on Palestine Action and the implications that followed. This is not just about one demonstration or one legal decision, it's about protest, free speech, state power, civil liberties, and how those clash in moments of political crisis. The story begins with Palestine Action, an activist group that has been known to carry out direct actions, sometimes targeting military-linked infrastructure or installations, particularly those they perceive to be complicit in the Israeli military apparatus. In July 2025, the UK government designated Palestine Action as a terrorist organization, making support for it illegal under counter-terror laws. Critics say the move is a heavy-handed attempt to suppress dissent. Supporters of the ban argue that some of the group's tactics crossed legal and ethical lines. In the weeks following that designation, the response from parts of civil society was fierce. Many saw the ban as a warning sign that in the name of security, governments might suppress legitimate protest and political expression. So when demonstrators gathered to oppose this ban, they adopted "I will not be silenced" as both a creed and a rallying cry. One of the pivotal moments came in London. Despite calls by government officials, police chiefs, and even appeals in the wake of a tragic attack on a synagogue in Manchester, protesters proceeded to sit in central public spaces, silent and defiant, holding placards such as "I oppose genocide," "I support Palestine Action." They insisted the protest was peaceful, symbolic, and necessary. The police responded. In one major rally in Trafalgar Square, nearly 492 people were arrested, most for supporting a proscribed organization, according to the Metropolitan Police. Many protesters refused to leave and were carried out by officers, sometimes with several officers assigned to a single individual. The arrests drew sharp criticism from rights groups. Amnesty International called it a breach of the UK human rights obligations, noting that enforcing mass arrests on peaceful sit-ins is not the proper role of police. To understand what's at stake, we need to unpack several strands: what motivates the protesters, how the state frames its response, the tensions around free speech, and what this might signal more broadly about democracy under pressure. First, motivation. For many participants, this is more than a protest over a single ban. It's about refusing to allow a state to draw boundaries around acceptable dissent. When a government declares a group to be a terrorist organization, associating with it becomes a serious crime. The protesters argue that many acts of Palestine Action were symbolic and nonviolent spray painting, slogans, disruption but not physical harm to people, and that equating those with terrorism dilutes the term and undermines civil liberties. This is not merely academic. For marginalized voices, protest is often the primary means of being heard. When that space contracts, their ability to critique power does too. The slogan "I will not be silenced" reflects that existential urgency. Second, the state's response. The government and security apparatus responded with a narrative of maintaining public order, protecting vulnerable communities, and preventing escalation. Especially after the Manchester synagogue attack, there was sensitivity about protests that some saw as inflammatory or insensitive. Government officials urged cancellation of the protests, citing hurt to Jewish communities and security strain. Police and political leaders warned that large protests risked inflaming tensions at a volatile moment, but critics argue that many of those warnings were pretexts. The policing approach, large-scale arrests, using areas of law crafted for counterterrorism, suggests an escalation in how protest is managed. Indeed, after the mass arrests, the government moved to give police new powers to restrict repeat protests in the same area, allowing them to consider the cumulative impact of demonstrations when imposing conditions. The tension is stark. The right to protest is fundamental in liberal democracies, but so is public order and security. How do you balance them? When a protest movement challenges not just a policy but the boundaries of permissible dissent, the stakes get higher. Third, free speech and precedent. When a government expands legal tools to suppress protests, there's a risk the expansion will be used more broadly, not just in this one case. If support for a certain group can be criminalized, might other advocacy groups come under pressure? If silent sit-ins can provoke mass arrests, will dissent in other forms be chilled proactively? Many legal observers worry this is more than a protest over one group, that it signals a shift in how states might treat protests. Some argue that states are using the guise of counterterrorism to pathologize dissent. Rather than treating peaceful protest as a protected right, they label it a security challenge. That framing changes the way police, courts, and public discourse treat protesters, from citizens exercising rights to potential threats. Fourth, the symbolic dynamics. The protest, by design, was silent, unarmed, and visually stark. The imagery of seated people being carried away while still holding signs is powerful. That juxtaposition, quiet defiance confronting force, is dramatic and poignant. The slogan, "I will not be silenced," works on two levels, literally protesting the ban on speech, and metaphorically insisting that power cannot mute resistance. Protesters did not just want coverage, they wanted to force a moral question: when is dissent oppressive? What is the legitimate boundary of state power? The responses were polarized. Some observers said the protest was tone deaf given recent religiously targeted violence. Others said canceling it would concede too much to fear. Some Jewish voices rejected conflation of Jewish identity and Israeli state policy, and joined broadly in decrying the ban or the policing techniques. Others felt the protest diverted security resources from protecting vulnerable communities, particularly in Jewish neighborhoods concerned by threats. Some accused protesters of insensitivity in timing. Others accused government and media of using the timing as a pretext. These layers make this moment morally fraught and politically charged. In reflecting on all that, there are a few lessons and questions worth holding on to. 1. Civil liberties are most vulnerable not when a regime is openly authoritarian, but when governments claim emergencies, security, or social tension as justification. The harder task is defending rights when the majority leans on fear as a rationale. The language of terrorism is powerful, and if used broadly, it can envelop many forms of dissent. 2. The nature of protest matters. Silent vigil, civil disobedience, symbolic action, these tools carry weight precisely because they are nonviolent. When authorities respond with force or legal escalation, the dissonance can be striking and shift public sympathies. The protesters seem to rely on that tension to reveal, in real time, how the state responds to unarmed dissent. 3. Empirical and legal boundaries matter. What is the threshold between protest and support for a proscribed group? If the law is ambiguous, then enforcement becomes discretionary, and that discretion often favors power. Many legal scholars will watch whether these arrests hold under challenge. If courts uphold them, that could entrench new limits to protest. 4. Narrative framing is key. Protest is not just physical presence, it's storytelling. Who is the good citizen? Who is the troublemaker? Who is protecting who? When governments label protesters as threats, that frames both public opinion and legal rationale. That is precisely why slogans like "I will not be silenced" matter, because they contest how the story is told. By refusing to be silent, the demonstrators hope to shift the narrative from lawbreakers to voices resisting suppression. In that sense, every arrest, every confrontation becomes part of the message. If I were to predict the immediate outcome, we'll see court challenges, some arrests may be quashed or overturned, public sympathy may shift to the protesters in some quarters, and the government may push further legislation to limit protest powers. But more importantly, this moment may galvanize deeper debates about protest, security, and democracy. In that sense, the protest is not just about Palestine action, it becomes a test case for how much dissent a democracy will tolerate under strain. Ultimately, this is a confrontation between two visions, one that views protest as a threat to order and another that sees protest as the oxygen of democracy. The slogan, "I will not be silenced," expresses a refusal to accept a future where state power writes the rules of dissent without challenge. So that's the story, complexities and all. Let me know what you think. Do you see the ban and arrests as necessary for security, or as overreach there to suppress dissent? How far can a democratic state limit protest before it undermines its own legitimacy? Leave a comment, and thanks for watching.